XPeng, one of China's best-known electric vehicle makers, has spent the last few years moving their brand up-market with the introduction of vehicles like the G9 SUV and X9 MPV. But now, they're going the opposite direction, down-market, with the introduction of an all-new, more affordable series of cars called Mona. This is Mona's first model, the M03 electric sedan.
Welcome to Wheelsboy, where we cover the newest, coolest, and wildest vehicles from the Chinese car market. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Mona actually began life as an electric vehicle program from China's largest ride-hailing company, Didi. Back in 2023, however, Didi decided it was done trying to develop its own cars and sold their assets and R&D to XPeng, who used it to create Mona. So what started as a purpose-built ride-hailing vehicle became a car that was aimed at private buyers.
Mona will likely be spun off into its own separate brand at some point, but for now it is a series within the XPeng brand and will be sold alongside other XPeng models, but at a lower price point. How low? Well, we don't know exactly as of filming. XPeng only tells us that it will be priced between 100 and 150,000 RMB, or 14 to 21,000 US dollars. That puts it in competition with high-selling vehicles like the BYD Qin Plus. When this car debuted, the CEO of XPeng promised that it would be the best-looking sedan priced under 200,000 RMB, or about 30,000 US dollars here in the Chinese car market. All I can say is, design is subjective. This thing definitely looks better in person than it does in photos. But as for whether or not it's beautiful, I will quote another member of the media who was here at this test drive event. They said that the headlights on this car have a lot of personality. I think the overall proportions of this car are quite nice, but there's certain areas where it looks organic, and I don't mean organic in a positive way. I think more organic like tumor-y kind of organic. That's particularly true here on the back end where it bulges out quite a bit. No doubt for practical reasons like ensuring there's plenty of space there in the back for cargo. We'll get to that in a moment though. I want to point out the fact that this car's design, the smooth round shape of it, does have one very big advantage, and that is low drag coefficient. In fact, it's the lowest in the world for a production vehicle at 0.194, and that is only possible because of the round shape. That and some cool tricks like this little winglet here on the D-pillar, which helps to wrap the air around the vehicle.
Lower drag means squeezing more range from the two available LFP blade batteries supplied by BYD. The 51.8 kilowatt-hour pack offers a claimed CLTC range of 515 kilometers, while the 62 kilowatt-hour pack ups that to 620 kilometers. Whichever pack you choose, XPeng makes a rather bold efficiency claim of 11.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, or 182 mpge.
Before I pop open this trunk, I want to point something out, and that's the fact that you're not going to find a single Mona badge on the exterior or interior of this car. That's because, as I'm told, there currently doesn't exist a Mona badge. Perhaps when they spin it off into its own separate brand, well, they'll have to give it its own badge when they spin it off into its own separate brand, but we'll have to wait until then to see what that badge might look like. For now, it's XPeng only. Now, let's finally pop this thing open. As you can see, it is a true lift-back design, which has a lot of advantages, particularly when it comes to space. This thing has 620 liters with the seats up and 1,603 liters when you lay them down. Those are mid-size SUV levels of space. One reason they're able to achieve that is because they use a torsion beam rear suspension as opposed to a multi-link. The advantage there being the torsion beam is much more compact and takes up less interior space, but it remains to be seen whether that results in a more compromised ride. The interior of the M03 does something very interesting, which is take an aesthetic we're used to seeing in more expensive vehicles, say over $30,000 US here in the Chinese car market, and introduce it to a lower price point. What I mean is that unlike a lot of cars at this price point, this car is pretty much bereft of physical buttons, except the ones you're going to see over here on the door. Instead, everything is controlled via this center screen, and it is the only screen in the car. There is no instrument cluster and there is no heads-up display. That last one should come as no surprise because the CEO of XPeng has made it clear that they are not a fan of heads-up displays. So let's talk about that single screen. It measures 15.6 inches and is powered by a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8155 processor. This is one of the cheapest cars I've ever seen with an 8155, but as most of you will know, the market has kind of moved on to the 8295 processor. According to XPeng, however, they've been able to wring every last bit of performance out of this 8155, so they're able to provide much faster response times and higher resolutions than other cars at this price point. And indeed, the 3D rendering on this screen is super smooth, as you can see with this little car model here. Even more importantly, however, this means they can still offer their surrounding reality. Surrounding reality is how they refer to their ADAS, their Advanced Driver Assistance System display. It not only renders the cars around you, but it also gives you a bird's eye view of the surrounding area of the car. I think it is, even 2 years after its launch, the best of its kind when it comes to ADAS displays. The UI for this 15.6-inch screen is different than any other XPeng model, mostly because it needs to accommodate your driving information up here in the top left, things like your gear selection and your speed. They need to be on the screen at all times. That means when you hit the menu button here, instead of it taking up the entire screen, it just takes up the bottom left. Now, I will say that this thing does have some pretty small fonts, so it's a little hard to use while driving, but XPeng says that they recommend you use their voice command system, which admittedly is very good. They also say that it's possible they could upgrade this in the future through OTA and make the fonts a little bit larger and maybe more legible when driving. Either way, the response times within that menu, as you can see, are lightning fast. This UI also has a couple of interesting functions, some of which are left over from when Didi, remember, that is China's largest ride-hailing service, was involved in developing this car, especially the software. Up here in the top right corner, there are a couple of kind of like games that they would have given to the drivers, because they spend a lot of time in the car, giving them something to do. So the first one up here in the top right, you can see this. This is called Muyu. Muyu was a wooden instrument used by Buddhist monks to keep time when chanting Buddhist scripture. For this car, it's just kind of a thing you can play with when you're sitting in traffic. You hit it, and it makes a sound like a wooden stick hitting a wooden instrument, and it also keeps count with how many times you've hit it. You can also use the mystery nipple, as I call it, by scrolling down to keep hitting it. Definitely don't want to do this when somebody else is in the car because they'll find it very annoying, but I have to admit, if you're stuck in traffic alone, this is kind of relaxing. Even better, however, is the one right underneath of that. If we hit this, this is a couple of little figures here. When you hit the play button, if you follow along with this little head, this is supposed to be used to teach you how to stretch your neck while driving. So the head looks up, I look up, then the head looks down, and then I move my head to the side. It's even telling me, it says voice command. It's like, oh, move your head to the right. That's cool, but you want to know the best one? That would be over here. This is Tigang Yundong. Tigang translates to anus, basically. If you look, when you hit the play button, this little, we'll say peach shaped, but when I say peach, you know what I mean. It's like, flex your peach. Wow, it's really holding it for a long time. Relax your peach. I have to say, if you were a driver who spent a lot of time in the car, this would actually be pretty good for your health. As it is in a private car, it's just kind of a funny feature to have.
The center screen also features what XPeng calls an industry-first music atmosphere map. If you are navigating somewhere while listening to music, an equalizer will appear on the bottom of the screen, and the lyrics to the song will show up on either side of your route. Wow.
Finally, This thing also has some multi-touch functions, i.e. you can use different numbers of fingers to achieve different things. So for example, if I take 3 fingers like this and go from left to right, I can open up that menu that I mentioned before or close it. If I do the same thing but from right to left, I open up the large app market that this car has access to. If I take 4 fingers like this, you open up the map, take 4 fingers and push in, you actually exit the map, and if you go from the bottom, you go back to the home screen. As I've already mentioned, the interior aesthetic of this car is very simple. But the thing about simple interiors is that it's kind of hard to then hide any kind of issues when it comes to material qualities because, well, there's just not a lot of patterns going on that you can use to hide it. Luckily for this car, the overall fit and finish and material is quite good, especially considering how cheap it's going to be priced. The only areas that I can find that feel a little bit cheap, well, this plastic on the center console is hard, but at least it's matte colored. The problem is here on the edge, it does feel a little bit sharp. I'd like to see them try and improve the finish on this because honestly, this is the only area in here that genuinely feels a little bit cheap to me.
What doesn't feel cheap is the list of available features, which include a wireless charging pad, heated and cooled front seats, and an 18-speaker surround sound audio system.
The M03 measures 4.78 meters in length with a wheelbase of 2.815 meters. As a result, rear legroom is no problem. Headroom, however, is at best adequate, thanks mostly to that sloping roofline, which does mostly start to slope behind your head, but still impinges on your headroom just a little bit. That's a common problem in this price category in cars with this particular styling. When it comes to your actual seating position, it's quite decent. The seat bottoms have a good length, and the seat floor, well, it's relatively high, but that's a problem with a ton of EVs. Luckily, you can manage to squeeze your feet underneath the seat in front of you, which allows you to achieve, as I like to say, a pretty comfortable seating position. In terms of features back here, not much to talk about. There is no fold-down center armrest, which is a little bit disappointing, but there is 2 USB Type-C charging ports. The M03 comes with your choice of 2 single front-mounted electric motor powertrains. There's a 140 kilowatt version with 225 newton-meters of torque, and then a more powerful 160 kilowatt hour version with 250 newton-meters of torque. That number puts it somewhere between cars like the BYD Qin Plus and the Deepal SL03. So the Qin Plus only makes around 100 kilowatts, significantly less in this car, but the SL03, while it makes around the same amount of kilowatts, it makes more torque, about 310 newton meters. Either way, the 0 to 100 time of 7.4 seconds is highly competitive in this category. I have to admit, I was a little bit taken aback when I learned that this car had a torsion beam rear suspension. After all, there are plenty of cars available cheaper than this one that have multi-link rear suspensions, but I'm going to teach you a little industry secret. Hardware, like multi-link rear suspensions, is very important to a car's ride, but just as important as hardware is how you tune that hardware. I've driven plenty of vehicles with more advanced multi-link rear suspensions and even air suspensions that didn't really ride that well, and that's because the suspension wasn't tuned properly. Think of it like cutting up a bunch of delicious ingredients and then throwing them into a bowl and handing it to somebody. That's not good enough. You have to cook the ingredients in order to actually make it a delicious dish. I think the M03 is a great example of this phenomenon. On paper, this torsion beam rear suspension probably shouldn't be able to provide the same level of ride quality as a multi-link rear. However, I don't think that most people would be able to tell the difference in actual practice. That includes me, and I've driven hundreds of cars. I do believe that this suspension, perhaps at the limits in terms of going over the largest bumps or taking the fastest corners, might not be able to provide the exact same level of performance as a multi-link, but when it comes to being used as a daily driver, yeah, I don't think anybody's gonna miss those extra links. One of XPeng's defining features as a brand is their driver assistance system called XNGP. It is one of, if not the most advanced driver assistance systems available from any manufacturer, and I should know as I've used all of them at this point. This car, however, does not have that advanced system. It has a slightly less advanced, a level 2 only system with lane keep assist and adaptive cruise control. However, I am told that there will be a Max version of this car that will use their upcoming vision-only system. That is going to debut, however, first on the XPeng P7 Plus later this year. This car's level 2 ADAS system is quite impressive, and not just because of its performance, which is good. It has lane keep assist, lane cruise control, adaptive cruise control, all of the features you would expect from a level 2 system, but what I think is most impressive is the fact that it is standard on every trim level, from the cheapest to the most expensive. Most other brands will only offer this level of equipment on their top spec or near top spec cars. Other cars have to make do with standard cruise control. One last thing that made me very happy about this system is the fact that just like every other version of XPeng's driver assistance, this one is strict. I love XPeng's driver assistance, and one of the reasons I love it is because they are the strictest in terms of driver monitoring. This little camera here is watching my eye line. The steering wheel is obviously using a torque sensor to make sure that I'm touching it. And then I say they're strict, I mean they only let you look away or take your hands off the wheel for no more than 3, 4, maybe 5 seconds at the most, whereas other systems will allow you to do so for 10, 20, even 30 seconds at a time. At highway speeds, so much can happen in that amount of time. So I think every system should be as strict as this one. Whether or not the XPeng Mona M03, wow, that's a mouthful there, whether or not it succeeds in the market is ultimately up to the consumer. However, I do think it is a unique proposition in this price point because it offers an aesthetic and a set of smart features that we normally only saw in more expensive cars. Time to find out whether that's exactly what consumers want at this price.